So I want to begin by saying Happy New Year to you guys. I haven't said that to you because I haven't seen you. It's only 6 days in the new year. Anybody still writing 2018? You are? Oh. I wrote my first 2019 this morning, and that's the first time I wrote a check and put for the offering, and I write 2019 first thing. I was kind of proud of myself. For today, I thought we would look at a couple of stories that are often ignored or not talked about a lot in the life of Jesus. We kind of jump right from the little baby Jesus, which is at Christmas time, which we just celebrated, to the adult, fully grown Jesus. And there's good reason for that, because we don't have a whole lot of scriptural stories about Jesus from the time he was born until he began his ministry. We don't have that 30 years is pretty vacant. It's pretty void in Scripture. There's 2 of the 4 Gospels that talk about that time period. There are also the 2 of the 4 Gospels that talk about his birth, Matthew and Luke. Mark begins right with an adult Jesus, and John begins in some spiritual realm talking about in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and then talks about light coming into darkness. But it really doesn't name Jesus necessarily and doesn't tell the story of his birth. Luke tells the story of his birth, and Matthew tells a little bit of his birth. Matthew focuses on Joseph and Joseph's struggle with finding out that his fiancée, Mary, was pregnant and knowing that it wasn't his. And so there's good reason for that, but I don't understand why churches regularly don't look at the couple of stories that we do have. And maybe it's because they look at them once and then they don't, I didn't go back in my sermon files and look to see when the last time I preached on these stories was, but it hasn't been very recently, I can tell you that. We kind of just look over them. So this morning I thought it would be a good idea to look at a couple of these stories. Actually, in the passage of Scripture that Pastor Sharon read, there are 4 distinct time frames in Jesus' life. There's 8 days, there's 33 days, there's every year, and then there's when he was 12. There's 4 different time frames in this passage. So we're going to talk about those 4 time frames this morning. And then in Matthew's gospel, he talks about 2 time frames of Jesus' birth, right after his birth. The time frame when he was about 2 years old, and God said to his parents, take them, because the Herod was livid that this new king was on the scene, and he wanted to kill the new king, and so he sent out his troops looking for this new king and to kill all of the babies. And so God said to Mary and Joseph, take Jesus to go to Egypt. Interesting that he went to Egypt, because there's, history with the Israelites that went to Egypt in captivity. But he went to Egypt to hide, and then he came back. And there's parallels with the story of Moses in that whole thing. And so Matthew tells us that. Luke doesn't tell us that. But Luke tells us about his circumcision, about his dedication to the Lord and the rite of purification that Mary had to go through. He also tells us about their annual trips to the temple. And the temple, well, it wasn't like here. They had to travel a long way to get to church. They didn't go to church every week, but they went back annually for the Passover celebration. And then tells us about one experience at age 12 when Jesus and his family were back in the temple for the Passover celebration. So the first verse 22 or 21 says, 8 days later, when the baby was circumcised, he was named Jesus, and the name given him was the name given him by the angel even before he was conceived. So that's the first time frame we have, 8 days. Then it goes on and says, then it was time for the purification offering as required by the law of Moses after the birth. And if you're reading that, you think, oh, well, it just moves from the circumcision to the purification ritual. But if you know about the purification ritual, and the people would have known that at the time, Luke wants us to know that. We find out about the purification ritual in Leviticus 12. We read there the whole of the chapter 12. It's on the screen too. The Lord said to Moses, "Give the following instructions to the people of Israel. If a woman becomes pregnant and gives birth to a son, she will be ceremonially unclean for 7 days, just as she is unclean during her menstrual period." So there was a point at which every month, every woman who was on her menstrual cycle was considered unclean and was not able to be in the temple and participate in the worship experience. And after childbirth of a boy, the woman was considered unclean for 7 days. Of a girl, we'll read in a minute, the woman was considered unclean for 14 days. Wild stuff. Not fair is right. But anyhow, this is the time that Jesus was born, and this is what's going on. And so it says then, after the 8th day, the boy's foreskin must be circumcised. So that's what's happening in this beginning verse. Then, after waiting 33 days, so the next piece, verse 22, picks up 33 days after Jesus' birth. After waiting 33 days, she will be purified from the bleeding of childbirth. During this time of purification, she must not touch anything that is set apart as holy, and she must not enter the sanctuary until her time of purification is over. If a woman gives birth to a daughter, she's ceremonially unclean for 2 weeks, for 14 days, and just as she is unclean during her menstrual period. After waiting 66 days, so double the time for giving birth to a boy child, after waiting 66 days, she will be purified from the bleeding of childbirth if it's a girl. When the time of purification is completed for either a son or a daughter, the woman must bring a 1-year-old lamb for a burnt offering and a young pigeon or turtle dove for a purification offering. So they did this they had this sacrificial system where they sacrificed animals as an offering to the Lord to find ability to be purified and just as a burnt offering. And so it goes on and says she must bring her offerings to the priest at the entrance of the temple, because until she's been purified, she can't go into the temple. And so this is kind of what's going on in Mary and Joseph's life with Jesus. It says that the priest will then present them to the Lord to purify her. Then she will be ceremonially clean again after her bleeding at childbirth. These are the instructions for a woman after the birth of a son or a daughter. If a woman cannot afford to bring a lamb, listen to this. If she cannot afford to bring a lamb, she must bring 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons. One will be for the burnt offering and the other for the purification offering. The priest will sacrifice them to purify her, and she will be ceremonially clean. And so, we learn something from Luke about Mary and Joseph in this statement. Luke says here that they took with them 2 turtle doves or a pair of young pigeons. What Moses said in Leviticus, what the Lord said was, the required offering is a lamb, a 1-year-old lamb. If you're not well off enough to have a lamb, you bring 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons. So we learn that Mary and Joseph don't have a lot of money, but they're still doing what they're required to do by the law by being here and bringing these 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons. And then in Exodus 13, verses 1 and 2, we read the other thing that's going on here with Mary and Joseph and Jesus at the temple. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Dedicate to me every firstborn among the Israelites. The first offspring to be born of both humans and animals belongs to me." So they're at the temple both for the purification ritual and the sacrifice, but they're also there for the dedication of Jesus to the Lord. And here in our tradition, we do a dedication of children We don't do it at 33 days. We do it whenever the parents feel ready to. We don't do baptism. We believe that baptism happens as you're an adult. When you make that decision to follow Jesus and you want to be baptized as somebody who can make that decision for themselves. We don't look to parents to make that decision for their children. But we do have a rite of dedication where we recognize that all children, not just the firstborn, but all children are beloved by God. And the rite of dedication that we do is a promise that the church makes to the parents and the parents make to God, a covenant that we make to raise that child in the ways of Christ. And it's a beautiful service, and we offer that, much like Jesus and his parents. They brought him to dedicate him to the Lord at this point. There's a couple of things to note here before I get into what I think the message is of this, and that is that, before I do that, let me say that the third segment we see here is when Luke tells us that every year Jesus and his parents go to Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover festival. So that's an every year thing. Then right after that, that's just one verse. Then the very next verse, Luke says that when Jesus was 12, they went to Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover like they've done every year before. And so we have that snippet as well, and we're going to talk about that. So those are the 4 time periods that we have of Jesus' life when he's 8 days, 33 days, every year, and at age 12 in the Gospel of Luke. In the Gospel of Matthew, we have when he's 2-ish, and then when he's a little older, when they return after Herod has died and the threat of his death is gone. So a couple of things to note here, and that is that every gospel, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, is written by a different person to tell the story of Jesus. And the writers of each of those gospels has an agenda. They have a purpose. They have a message that they want to communicate to the people. They're taking stories that were told orally over years and years, and they're recording it so that we can have it in writing. And Luke has a definite agenda that I want us to get this morning in including these stories of Jesus when he was 8 days, 33 days, and 12 years old. He's got an agenda. And he wants to make sure that we get this message. So more on that in a minute. The second thing I want you to note is that every time you see something repeated more than once in Scripture, it's a flashing light. Pay attention. Pay attention. So in this passage, we see something repeated about Jesus twice. I think it's part of Luke's agenda. We see in verse 40 where Luke says, there the child grew up healthy and strong, talking about Jesus. He was filled with wisdom and God's favor was on him. And in verse 52, Luke again says, Jesus grew in wisdom and stature and favor with God and all people. So it's important for us to recognize that this young Jesus, the one that we don't see a whole lot, and in this time frame that we don't see a whole lot about him, is growing. He's growing in wisdom, godly wisdom, and he's growing in favor with God and with people. People are starting to take note and recognize who he is and be interested in learning more about him and listening to him and embracing his teachings. And so I think that's really important for us to get that. Jesus was wise and found favor with God and with people. Now back to the message that I think Luke is communicating in including this story for us and these stories for us. And that is that God's kingdom is for all people. We hear it in a variety of ways. If we go back and look at first chapter 1 and chapter 2, when the angel announces the birth of Jesus to the shepherds in the line about it's a gift to all people, peace on earth and goodwill to all people. And then in Simeon's line, Simeon, when he sees Jesus, holds Jesus and praises God, saying, "Sovereign Lord, now let your servant die in peace as you have promised. I have seen your salvation, which you have prepared for all people. He is the light to reveal God to the nations," all people. "And he is the glory of your people Israel." And we see it in the character, Luke's agenda, that God's kingdom is for all people. We see it in the characters that he includes in these stories. So if you go back to chapter 1, you see early on that this old couple, Zechariah, who is a high priest, well beyond childbearing age, his wife was unable to have a child. And in that culture, that was looked down on. She was inferior. And she was struggling with that, and she was well beyond that. And so she gets word that she's going to have a baby. And that baby's not the Messiah, but that's the cousin of the Messiah, John the Baptist, and he's to go ahead of Jesus and prepare the way. He's just a little bit older than Jesus. And so you see God working in the lives of these old religious official and an old barren woman. Then the next thing Luke tells us is about Mary and Joseph. Mary's a young girl. She's not married yet. They're engaged, but they're not married. And next thing you know, the angel's telling her she's going to be pregnant with a baby. And then they're telling her that she is pregnant with a baby. And so you got God showing up to this unmarried woman and her fiance, who struggles with this fact that it's not his child, but he stays with her. And then, when the baby is born, who's the first to find out besides Mary and Joseph? The shepherds. And we talked about this 2 weeks ago. The shepherds are nobodies. They're marginalized, fringe people. Yet they're the people that God chose, according to Luke, to announce the birth of Jesus to. So you see this odd collection of people. And then in today's story, you got this old man who's on his deathbed, who's just waiting to see the Messiah so that he can die. Simeon. And Anna, she's 84. Now, to some people, 84 is not old. And to some other people, 84 is ancient. It all depends on where you are in that spectrum. But so God shows up to her. She's there in the temple day and night, Luke tells us, looking for the Messiah. She's a widow. And there she is. And there he is. And so look at this menagerie of people that God's showing up to. I think Luke's intentionally trying to communicate to us that God's kingdom is for all people. There's a place for you in the story of Jesus. The kingdom of God is for all people. There's a place for you, for me, for us, for people that aren't in here, in God's story of redemption and love, no matter who you are, no matter where you are, no matter where you've been. There's a place for you. Luke seems to want to draw readers of every age and stage with this unfolding story of Jesus, God's salvation to the world. No matter who you are, the story of Jesus can become your story. Simeon and Anna are on the lookout for Jesus. They've been waiting and watching for Jesus to show up. You know what? If you're going to find Jesus, you got to look for him, right? And if you're not looking for him, you're probably not going to find him. So the question for you today is, are you looking for Jesus? And the second question for you today, and this is the one I want to have some interaction with, that's why I primed the pump. Where have you seen Jesus in recent weeks? I've got two I'll tell you, but I'll open it up to you. Where have you seen Jesus in recent weeks? Who wants to begin? Connie D.
Well, I don't remember the rest of the weeks, but today I needed a shoehorn for my left foot, and I was partway back to get it, and my shoe went on, and I said, "Oh, praise the Lord! I don't have to go get it."
Awesome. So in the little moments, who else wants to tell a story or share where they've seen Jesus? Because if you're not looking for him, you're not going to see him.
At Christmas time, we were having April's mom over, and then she has a couple friends. She has a lady that's moved in living with her, and then a couple other lady relatives and stuff. And April told me, she said, these ladies really don't have any other family around. They don't have anywhere to go. Let's have them over with Christmas with us for our Christmas dinner and Christmas Day, and we'll get them a couple presents and stuff and hand it out. And I thought, that might be pretty neat, but you don't really know what's going to happen with people we haven't had in before. But when they came over, the whole Christmas Day and that evening at dinner and stuff was so awesome. I mean, it was just really, really good. And you can see God and all that.
Absolutely.
For having them over and then talking to them and celebrating Christmas with them and eating with them. And we got them some presents to open. And it was all just the coolest thing in the world to do that. On the spur, we knew they were coming, but it was kind of a spur of the moment decision.
Awesome.
To ask them to come over.
Awesome.
Oh, and also I'd like to say, I have to sit back here all the time because I wouldn't recognize anybody. I tell everybody by the back of their heads. If I sat up front, I wouldn't recognize you anymore.
You're feeling guilty, aren't you?
My friend has a red coat, and I know she would love to have red gloves, so I decided I'd buy her one at Macy's, and I was shocked they had red. Anyway, she bought a red pair of gloves for herself and two others. Well, her sister, she loaned them to her sister. She loved them so much, she gave them to her. And, she was tempted in the car. She was driving me somewhere to say how she'd love to have a pair of red gloves. Well, she was somewhat stunned when her Christmas present from me was a pair of red gloves, the exact ones that she fortunately gave her sister, but was upset about.
Huh. Neat.
When you initially mentioned about seeing Jesus, I couldn't figure out anything. But this morning, what was really, really cool was with my grandbaby girl. I mean, she was just showing unbelievable love to her family. And I was just sitting back here watching her hugging these two in front of me, just ooshing out the love, and then sharing it here and everything else. I saw Jesus
Absolutely.
And that unconditional love in her just ooshing out on everybody. It was cool, including me. So that was good.
The best of all, right? Yeah.
Well, I didn't really look for this, but years ago I read a book that was written about Jesus and his birth. And when they were in the stable when he was about to be born, the men weren't allowed to be in the same room with the woman when she's even husbands weren't allowed. So he was going out like he was supposed to, and she screams out, "Joseph, come here! I need you!" So God, or Jesus, broke the first rule that he didn't think was necessary.
Mm.
And along his way, he broke a lot of the rules.
Mm.
But I thought about that for years, and I think a little infant baby changed things for a lot of women.
And people.
And people.
Mm-hmm. Not that women aren't people. I didn't mean that. Don't go there. Don't write me any emails. Don't blast me on Facebook, please. I did not mean that. Yes. Yep. They were very lopsided, as we saw in the Levitical law that I read this morning. Oh, nope. Go ahead.
Wednesday, I guess it was, the first day back to school. I felt awful, like all day. I guess it was the time that front was coming in, but it felt like my blood pressure was up all day, and I've been on blood pressure medicine, so I was like, oh, well, it's not working, and I felt terrible, like my heart was in my throat all day, and I was sore and antsy and couldn't sit still. It was not a good day. Blood pressure was fine, but I don't know what was going on, whether it was the front that made me feel bad or starting Strattera. Doesn't matter, but I felt like poo. And went to pick up Aaron from daycare. And of course, he sees me, Mommy, 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 la, 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 and comes running over, and I pick him up and he squishes my face. And that was awesome. But then I get home and I'm trying to make supper and I'm still feeling just, ugh. And he comes running in and he hugs my legs and he goes, hi baby, hi baby. He goes, come here baby, I pick you up. And so he picked me up, which involved wrapping his arms around my legs and scooting me into the next room. So I hear, you can imagine me shuffling along with the little one holding on to my legs. And then he goes, I put you in your stroller. Get in your stroller. And so he put me in my stroller and proceeded to stroll me around the house, which meant I had to squunch down, and he put his hands on my behind and pushed me in my stroller around the house. And then he goes, come on, I take you out. And he carried me and he goes, you lay down, take a nap. So anyway, that was Jesus sending Aaron to carry me around on my bad day.
It's amazing the ways that Jesus shows up if we're looking. So
harder to come up with something on this side. The feng shui is just like...
These come apart. Let me drag you over to that side. Now we got the feng shui.
And so I was saying, I was really coming around this.
You never know what's going to happen in this church, right?
That's right. It's in my new seat. Pay money for this one. He's crazy. Where I saw Jesus over the last week, I always say I see Jesus everywhere all the time. It's like I never don't see Jesus. I always see Jesus, but something did happen over the break. I have a brother.
Break? What break? She's a school teacher.
Weren't you on a little break too?
Kinda.
Anyway, it was kind of strange because my sister had gotten a phone call or something and said that a brother that I have not seen or spoken to in 40 years was trying to get up with me. And I said, Dwayne? And she says, yeah. And I said, well, it was his wife. Her name's Fran. She's on Facebook, and I'm friends with her on Facebook, but he's not on it or whatever, and I see little things and all. But anyway, it's like, wow, and it's been so long, and I remember as a teenager, he never lived with us. It's my one of my mother's children. It's my half, I guess, brother. But when I was younger, all the other children, it was a Brady Bunch situation, I always said I wanted all the brothers and sisters together. Why couldn't we all live together and be together? So when he became a teenager, he could drive. He drove to where we were living, and I kind of got to know him as my brother. I am 3 years younger than him, and we used to hang out and everything. But then time goes by, and so it's been 40 years since anything. And so I said, well, sure, I sent my number to her friend. And I happened to be in the mountains at the time, so I couldn't respond right away because I didn't have cell service. I'm like, so I sent a text through Messenger, blah, 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 because I can do Facebook up there. But anyway, I finally talked to him, and I said, hey. And of course he sounds the same, and he kind of just, it's like no time had gone by. How are you doing and everything? He's, good. He says, well, my adoptive parents are both dead now. And, my dad, he passed away several years ago. And of course this was some time ago. And I said, yes. I said, I was so sorry to hear that. And so we talked and, talked about, he just so happens he has friends in the same mountain development as where I am. Didn't know that either. But the thing was that, we talked, and I said, you know what? You're my brother. I said, and I love you, and I want us to be able to get together and so forth and so on. So it was good. And there was just this conversation. It ended. And so then he sent me a text, a picture of his puppy dogs with his wife. And I sent a picture of my kitty cat and blah, blah, blah. It's okay. But then the next day I got a text from him. He says, I'm worried. I'm going to the doctor Saturday. And they think I have some kind of aneurysm in my stomach or something strange going on in my stomach. And he says, I'm really worried. Now, his wife knows on Facebook the things that I put on there and everything. I know he's seeking comfort, and he was also, I think, seeking Jesus in a way where he thought he might be able to make that connection. And so I said, I talked to him and I said, Dwayne, I said, everything's going to be all right. God loves you. Everything's good. And, I'm going to be praying for you. And I want you to let me know this and this and this. And he says, well, I'm glad to hear you say that. I needed that really bad. And he says, and he says, I want us to get together and everything. I said, we are going to get together. I said, you're my brother and I love you and you're always going to be my brother. And so let's go through this together. Jesus, I think, pushed him in my direction because that's, I think, where he could find Jesus. And, I was kind of blown away by it all, and it all made sense because he didn't ask to speak like that to my other sister. He went through her, their sister, brother and sister too. It's the same situation, and he talked to her, but she says, I don't know. There's something he wants from you, and I don't know what it is. I don't know why, and so it's all good.
Neat. Thank you. You can sit there. You can. Here, I just move it right back for you. So, a couple of things that I want to share. I'll share this one first because it kind of ties in with what Kelly was just saying in some ways. On Thursday night, I received a long Facebook message from someone who used to be a part of Community of Joy, who I think has only been in this building a couple of times in our almost 12 years being here. We bought this in 2007, in May of 2007. So that means that this person was a part of our congregation back when we met at Salisbury Christian School, which was a long time ago. And I don't have a whole lot of interaction, a little bit on Facebook, but none personal connections with this person. And I thought it was really interesting that they chose to send me this long message. And I want to read the message. Hello, Pastor Martin. I was just thinking about a sermon you once did on forgiveness. Now, a sermon that they heard that I did had to be at least 12 years ago, probably, or longer. We've been here 20. So it could somewhere in the last 20 years, but not in the more recent of the 20 years. And that, I found that just truly amazing. This touched me. And she says, and I wanted you to know that I thank you for that. I thought about that sermon many times over the years with many others. And although it took me some time, I I have been able to forgive some people in my life that are very important to me, one of which is my sister, one of my sisters. I didn't talk to her for about 8 years, even though she had tried to reach out to me. One day your sermon popped into my head again, and I decided to reach out to her. I am so glad that I did. I didn't even realize how much I had missed her. I remember sitting in that seat listening and thinking of those that I had not forgiven, feeling guilty and almost wanting to cry and thinking, I don't know if I can do that. With God's help and yours, I was able to. Every time I think of my sister, I think of that sermon. Since our mending about 2 years ago, we have been able to laugh and talk again, recalling long-time memories and discussing what is going on in our lives together. She doesn't live close to here, but we are Facebook friends and we talk on the phone, so we are able to stay in contact. I plan to try to go see her when I can manage it. I always thank God for going through you to deliver the message of forgiveness. I am sure you still incorporate that same message in your sermons and hoping others will be able to forgive someone important to them as well. For me, it really made a difference. So thanks again. Hope all is going well with you. And I thought, wow, that's Jesus. That's amazing that this person, for who knows how many years, remembered something that was said in a sermon about forgiveness and could act on it and hadn't acted on it right away. You know, usually if you're going to act on something that's said in a sermon, it's pretty quickly. It's not years and years and years later, but absolutely amazing. And that touched me that she took the time to write that long message this week, and I thought I'd share it. Bless you. The other thing that happened the Friday after Christmas, before Sharon and I left for vacation, I ran the computer over here to the ministry center for last Sunday, and in the mailbox was a letter and 3 $100 checks. And I want to read this letter to you. I shared it on Facebook. Some of you may have seen it there, but I was just so touched by this letter. And I don't know any of the 3 couples that are signed by this letter, despite one of them's last name being Hutchison. Not Hutchison, Hutchinson. Our name was Hutchinson before we took the N out hundreds of years ago. But anyhow, dear Pastor Hutchison, we are 6 friends who are fortunate enough that our only real wants or needs are to try to make our world, and particularly our little piece of it, a better place for all. With that in mind, we agreed that rather than to continue to buy each other Christmas gifts each year, we would select a charity and contribute to it as a group. Each couple comes up with a suggested charity, and we discuss them at our annual Christmas dinner. This year, we selected the Camden Community Garden from among 3 worthy options put forth. Why? First, because it is a program designed specifically to build community, to bring people together in a way that promotes health, education, and fellowship while having fun. Second, because we believe that our small contributions can actually have an impact on the community garden, can help to further the goals of the garden and bring us spiritually and physically into that community. We wish you another season of growth of both food and community, and we are grateful to assist in such an admirable effort. And then they signed it, the 3 couples, and each wrote a check out of their account for $100 to the Camden Community Garden. And that's Jesus. That's just absolutely, I don't know them. I don't know how they heard about it. I don't know how they got the connection with us, me, and here. I don't know any of that. 1 of them lives in this neighborhood, and the other 2, I don't even know where. I mean, I know where they live because I have their addresses, but I don't know where it's at. It's not a place in Salisbury that I'm familiar with. And so I have no clue, but that's how God works, and you see it in amazing ways. Did you think of something else?
Yeah, no, it just something you said. My youngest son,
We're recording it.
I can be loud.
Oh, it's not on. It's on now. It's not. It's my fault. Sorry.
No, it's okay. My youngest son, that story you reminded me of, my youngest son came up several years ago and said to us, why don't we just not do Christmas with each other? Which in my opinion was crazy because that's what we always do. She said, why don't we just figure out somebody to give a gift to or whatever we would do? So there's a lot of discussion or whatever because it was a sermon that was given to him in his church down in Florida. So we did it. It felt really, really good. I didn't feel real good because I wasn't giving to my children, but then again, giving to something else was really pretty good. So it's an interesting thing to do.
I love the concept, and it would be an act of God. I'll stop there. I've been married 30 years, and I'd like to stay married for 30 more.
So I think it was just the day after Ralph had passed away, I was reading Facebook and saw a story of a woman whose husband had died, and so at Christmas time she had started she would put a card in the tree, and instead of a gift to her husband, she would gift someone, and she would write it in a card, and that would be their last Christmas tradition, would be reading to the family what Daddy's gift was this year. So when my dad passed away, I started putting a card in the tree for him, and then I would take it in a Ziploc bag, and Ralph and I would take it to the grave and put it on the grave, and it was my gift to him, but I didn't think about gifting something. So when Ralph passed away and I read this, I decided to gift someone. So I gifted and stopped by to another lady who was a widow who lost her husband several years ago, and stopped by and not only gifted her a gift in the memory of him, but had a nice visit with her. And so that's my new annual thing, to, with the card in the tree, have what my gift will be to him to someone else.
Absolutely
and that's
love
all
it.
Jesus, because that did not come from my mind.
Yeah. Absolutely love it. I love it when God shows up in that way. After all, it's his birthday, right? You know? So there's a place for each of you, for each of us, for everyone in the story of Jesus. Jesus is alive and present in our world, and we just have to open our eyes and look for him because he's there. And when we look for him with our whole heart, the scripture tells us that we will find him. But like Simeon and Anna, we have to keep watch. We can't sit back and rest on our past relationship with Jesus. He wants a dynamic, growing relationship with us. And that leads me to the last of our 4 stories that we have in our passage. And that story is of Jesus returning with his parents to Jerusalem to celebrate Passover. The implications of that are huge. Passover was a time when the Israelites were in captivity in Egypt. And God was using Moses to try to free them. But Pharaoh had a hard heart and wouldn't let them go. And God was going to get his attention, and he was going to kill every child, male child, firstborn male child in the land. Except he told his children, the Israelites, he said, if you mark your post, your doorpost with blood, the blood of a lamb, I will pass over your house in that night that I'm going to do that. And that's what they did. They marked their doorpost with the blood of a lamb. Get the connection to Jesus. And so that's what they're there. And every year after, even long after, even now, the Jews celebrate Passover. And it's marking that time in history. And so they were there to celebrate Passover. And Jesus' family and all that had come with him from their town, it was quite a ways back to Nazareth. They had gone back, and they went as a herd, they went as a village, and everyone took care of everyone else's kids. So don't be hard on Mary and Joseph for not realizing that Jesus wasn't with them, but Mary and Joseph they're on the journey back, and they realize that they don't have Jesus with them. They don't know where he is. And so they go back to Jerusalem, and they spend 3 days looking for him, Luke tells us. And they finally go into the temple, and there he is, sitting among the teachers of the law, teachers of the pastors, the priests, and he's asking them questions, and he's engaging them, and they're amazed at his understanding. And Joseph and Mary see this. And so what I think that story tells us, and the way it plays out as a way applicable to us, is this: that finding Jesus will normally involve a surprise. And every time we relax and think we really understand Jesus, I mean, they thought he was with them. They were blown away that he was in the temple at 12 years old, engaging with the religious officials. Every time we relax and think we really understand Jesus, he will be up ahead or perhaps staying behind while we dive headfirst into life without thinking. We cannot assume, brothers and sisters, that Jesus is accompanying us as we go off on our own business. And we do that a lot. Go off on our own business and assume that Jesus is with us in that. If and when we sense a lack of Jesus' presence, we must do like Mary and Joseph and start looking for him. Go on an all-out search. Open our eyes. Seek the scriptures. Seek him through prayer. Seek him through relationships with other believers who might be able to help us find him again. And let us not give up seeking until we find him. You see, Jesus is always about doing the Father's business. But we often lose him when we think we are too, because the Father's, we think we are too doing the Father's business, but when in reality, we're doing our own. The best thing we can do is to keep looking for Jesus, to pray, to read the scriptures, to share with brothers and sisters in the faith, and ask ourselves this question: is what I am doing bringing honor to Jesus? Because it's real easy to get off track. It's real easy to follow our own agenda, thinking that we are pursuing God's agenda. Anytime we point fingers in judgment, anytime we push people down, anytime we put people aside, we have lost sight of Jesus and his mission in the world and our lives. And Luke is making it clear to us in the opening of his gospel that the story of Jesus is a story for us. It includes us. It includes all people. No matter who we are, no matter where we are, no matter where we've been, there is a place for you in the story of Jesus. All people are welcome in God's kingdom. Thanks be to God. So if you have something else you want to say to interact with this, let's hear it.